So today, we're going to dive into the life of a man who, believe it or not, shaped history. Not from a throne, not from a battlefield, but from a simple wooden chair. His name was Edward McKendry Bounds, and his most important work, well, it started long before most people were even awake.
And that quote right there, it really gets to the heart of his story, doesn't it? While everyone else was focused on building monuments and leading armies, Bounds was forging something completely different in the quiet, early hours of the morning. So who exactly was this guy, and where did his incredible journey begin?
All right, so let's start at the beginning. And you might be surprised to hear, it doesn't start in a church or a seminary. It starts in a courthouse. Bounds' early life was on this perfect track for what we'd call conventional success, but it was a path that left him feeling totally and utterly empty.
So you can see here he was born back in 1835 out in Frontier, Missouri, and a huge influence on him was his mother's faith, which she summed up in this one little phrase, pray without ceasing. He was sharp, he was driven, and by his early 20s, he was already a successful lawyer. On the outside, he was the picture of a respectable, calm, put-together guy.
But here's the thing, on the inside, it was a completely different story. All the logic of the courtroom, all the prestige of his career, none of it could answer this deeper question that was eating away at him. This feeling of just emptiness, it pushed him right to a breaking point, and ultimately to a huge transformation.
It's almost like his life had these two completely separate acts. The change was just total. He went from chasing worldly success to spiritual surrender, from relying on human logic to trusting in something bigger. He basically traded a life of public influence that felt hollow for one of humble holiness that brought him this peace he just couldn't explain.
And this quote from Bounds himself, man, it just nails it. This was the core of his big change. For him, it wasn't about adding a little religion to his already successful life. No, it was about emptying himself, getting his own ego out of the way to make room for faith. And this new conviction, it was about to be tested in the most extreme way you can imagine.
So he has this newfound faith, this new direction, but it's about to be thrown into the fire, literally, of the American Civil War. And this period would end up defining him, not as a soldier, but as a man of absolutely unshakable spiritual strength.
Now, it's really important to get this. His motivation wasn't political. It wasn't about militancy or taking sides. For him, it was pastoral. He saw the battlefield as this place of incredible suffering, and he felt this deep, powerful calling to bring comfort and prayer right into the middle of all that chaos.
But his mission gets cut short big time. In 1863, he's captured and spends the rest of the war, we're talking years, in a notoriously awful prison. When he finally walks out at the end, he's physically a wreck, but something inside him had been completely reforged by the whole ordeal. Think about that for a second. While he's locked up, he gets offered a get-out-of-jail-free card. All he has to do is swear an oath to the Union. But he refuses. He makes it crystal clear that his ultimate loyalty, his real allegiance, was to something much, much bigger than any earthly government or war. You see, for most people, prison would be the worst thing that ever happened to them, a punishment. But for Bounds, he saw it as a classroom, a profound spiritual education. This idea that really tough times are actually a greenhouse for your faith became a huge theme for him later on. He lived it long before he ever wrote about it.
I mean, just try to put yourself there for a second. You're cold, you're hungry, you feel hopeless, and a fellow prisoner just asks this question that's on everyone's mind. It's not some philosophical debate, it's a cry from the absolute bottom. How on earth can we find any joy in a place like this?
And Bounds' answer, wow, it just flips the whole thing on its head. He immediately shifts the focus from their own suffering to the central story of his faith. It was such a simple but incredibly powerful response that didn't offer an escape, but a reason, a purpose to endure.
Okay, so the war ends, Bounds is free, and he doesn't come back broken or bitter. Not at all. He comes back with this conviction that was basically forged in a furnace, and he was ready to help rebuild a shattered community, starting literally from the ground up.
So he gets back to this town, Franklin, Tennessee, and it's just been ravaged by the war. But his first move isn't some grand 5-point plan to rebuild the buildings. Nope, he focuses on rebuilding the people. His very first action was to call them to prayer. And this wasn't just talk. He lived it. This right here was his playbook, his daily routine.
He was absolutely convinced that the most important battles of any day were won in those quiet early hours, long before he even talked to another person. The philosophy was simple. Connect with God first, then you can engage with the world.
And this is such a cool way to put it. What happened in Franklin wasn't some kind of magic trick or a fluke. For Bounds, it was a natural result. It was like changing the weather, spiritually speaking. When an entire community starts to breathe an atmosphere of prayer, revival is just the climate that follows.
So as he gets older, his ministry starts to shift again. He begins to translate this whole lifetime of experience and conviction into writing, into words that would end up outliving him by generations. It's like he went from pastoring one town to pastoring, well, everyone.
He starts writing for this major religious newspaper, the St. Louis Christian Advocate, but his process was completely different. He didn't just write about prayer, he literally prayed over every single article he wrote. For him, writing wasn't a job or a career, it was just an extension of his devotion, a gift that he felt belonged to the whole church.
And if you want to boil down everything he ever wrote into one single, kind of mind-blowing idea, this is it. So often, we think of prayer as the warm-up, right? It's what we do before we go out and do the real work. Bounds just completely rejected that. He insisted that prayer is the work. It's the greatest, most important work anyone can ever do.
This quote, this is basically the foundation for everything he believed. It's so simple but so profound. For him, prayer wasn't just some passive, personal thing to make you feel better. It was an active force. It was the main way he believed God actually steps in and shapes human history.
So after all of this, we have to ask, what's the lasting impact? What's the real legacy of a guy who spent most of his life in a quiet room, far away from all the centers of power and influence? Let's wrap this up.
You know, his legacy isn't something you can see in stone or steel. You can't point to it on a map. It's found in the countless lives that have been changed by his simple, relentless focus on prayer. He didn't build a big institution, he just showed people a path that he himself walked, faithfully, every single day of his life.
And that really leaves us with a huge question to chew on, doesn't it? In a world that's obsessed with measuring success by things that are visible and loud and popular, Bounds' life poses this powerful, countercultural question. What if the most significant, world-changing work we could ever do is the quiet, unseen, persistent work that happens on our knees?